I've decided not to share a PowerPoint, but rather to be present with you, even though we're on screens. It feels a little bit closer that way and less distant. I have got some notes that I'll refer to. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the country from where I'm speaking today and the Gaiamagal people who've looked after this country for thousands of years. It's a real privilege to live on this country. Everywhere across this continent, it's an awesome experience to live in these times and to try and get a glimpse of God's relationship with creation. The way that God lovingly holds all of this is just so awesome. The example of God's presence with, through, and in all of creation, of course, goes back billions of years, and with people on this continent, thousands of years. One way we as humans can see how to relate to God, people, and creation is by learning about Jesus and Jesus' relationship with creation, the way he noticed and held awareness, a loving gaze with God, understanding the birds, understanding the journey of a mustard seed and how it grows into such an almighty bush. The 40 days he chose to go into the wilderness, this is going bush, and praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, the call to pray in our gardens, to connect, to glorify God, but also to do the soul-searching work, to discern what our work is and our contribution on earth. Jesus knew the hermeneutic of creation, the book of creation. How do we read creation? How are we noticing the signs of the times, the spirit in the wind, the warmth and energy that flows from Brother Sun through us, through all of the things we eat and that we share in our energy of dialogue and action as human beings? Jesus also worked with storytelling to shift people's perception and to help us realise the gift of our lives and to put our lives to work with God as creatures who have these amazing senses, who have intellect and spirit, who have a capability to care for God's kingdom on earth. Living the evangelising mission is both, yes, a moral and social teaching, but it's also the intellectual, pastoral, spiritual, and ecological teachings that we're called to bring to bear, to give voice to through our actions, firstly, but through our words with people, to pass it on. At the moment, there's a real danger in our lives that our faith tradition and our faith lives can run separate from the ecological and the ecosystems that we're part of. We're seeing now with great urgency the scientific evidence, but also as non-scientists for some of us to see the signs of the times of the changing conditions taking place in our own ecosystems on Earth. At this time, there's immense floods that are sweeping across the country, on the East Coast in particular. The soil is full of water, it's retaining it, and it's running across, filling up the wonderful basin that is our food bowl, the Murray-Darling Basin. This is needed, of course, but there's a lot of water that causes some real problems. So there's something about how we hold this time of plenitude of water, the gift of that, the nourishment that that is, and understanding there's a huge amount of loss we faced with the bushfires in the 2019-2020 bushfire season that was unprecedented, so dangerous for our country, where we lost millions and millions of animals. So it's a time where this replenishment's happening. How are we entering into that time of regenerative energy through the flow of water, reflecting with that water and seeing what gifts it can bring? Our Catholic social teaching tradition teaches us much about the human condition. We've got over 100 years of this incredible work that's been gifted to us that's based on sacred scripture in dialogue with creation. And more we're learning about through the gift of Laudato Si. Laudato Si was so important in Catholic social teaching because it reoriented the teachings so that it's no longer seen from just a human perspective. It's putting us in our place and seeing the whole context of creation through which we're called to live and move and do this work. So what does Laudato Si and integral ecology mean for us and our communities? Well, tapping into an integral understanding of our lives, ourselves, and our place in creation means that there's a whole lot of wisdom that comes from outside our tradition and from within it that we're called to come to understand at a deeper level of our being. This means that we need to reflect together, that we need to discern, and we need to have lots of conversations about what our actions might be. So how can we personally and as communities better care for our common home? When we think about our parish contexts, perhaps one of the best places to start is with a few people who are also interested in learning about Laudato Si, about our relationships with our Creator, with each other and creation. Deliberately noticing that there's a diversity of our stories when we come together, inviting stories to be shared, those personal stories of our lives, where we grew up, what informed our sense of God, what informed our understanding of creation. Praying together, that's so important. And the prayers in Laudato Si are an enormous gift to us. But sometimes we might feel like we need some other prayers too. We can tap into the amazing resources that are available through our tradition of prayer, but sometimes they can feel very human-centred. You might like to look at resources like the Laudato Si movement's prayer book that offers a whole range of resources, short prayers and longer prayers, and many of them where you can reflect on different aspects of creation. We also need to have conversation about our dreams together. What is it that we're dreaming of when we connect with this call in Laudato Si from Pope Francis? And what might be the actions that help us realise this dream we share with God, with one another, with creation? I would caution us not to leap to action before we take the time for this diversity of stories, this prayer time, and this dreaming to be connected with. And I think it's so important that our first dialogue partners, as Pope Francis invites us to in Laudato Si, are our Indigenous brothers and sisters with great wisdom and knowledge and understanding and real relationship with creation that we need to learn from, that we can actually embark upon together. I would suggest that we meet regularly in these small groups in our parish contexts, in our school communities, in our social services enterprises, wherever we are within the context of our church, that we find a regular meeting pattern where we meet in a place that's visible. If we're part of the parish with this work, that we meet at the parish. Therefore, there's incidental meetings that might happen before the meeting and after the meeting with our parish priests, with our parish secretaries, and whoever is around. They start to hear the conversations that we're engaging with and why we're meeting as groups. That we begin perhaps also by reflecting on each chapter in Laudato Si, noticing together that there are different insights emerging for each person, but there might be a commonality of what's emerging as well. It's a good idea to write down in some form and record perhaps our conversations that helps us go back and reflect on what has emerged and summarise it so that the group's intention is really concretised. We can then take that to our parish council, to our parish priests, and invite dialogue around what has emerged from that discernment. This can then form the basis of a very simple plan for the first year. Registering your group as a Laudato Si circle means that you can receive monthly newsletters and resources to support your community. You can also take a very simple plan and enroll in the Laudato Si Action platform. And through that, once you've enrolled, you then have access to a wide range of resources and support for the journey that you go on, whether you're in a hospital, a parish, a school, a university, an agency, a religious order, all of those resources that are there for you. I would also invite you to see that you should keep inviting people to be part of the group. Keep inviting others to participate, even outside. So this way we evangelize in our action by inviting people from outside our community to come and be part of the dialogue about Laudato Si. People who bring expertise from their work life, their studies, their interest will enrich the ways in which we go forward together. I would also suggest that in this first phase of action, which is the dialogue, that the next action be planned that brings together people in the community beyond the group. One way that you can do this is with a new film that we've released called The Letter. It features Pope Francis in dialogue with 4 particular voices of creation. One is the youth in our communities, one is Indigenous leaders, one is climate refugees, and another is creation itself. So this film is freely available on YouTube, and you can invite a community screening to take place within the context of our church that brings people inside. The dialogue that follows the film is what is most important. The film, of course, offers many rich entry points for that dialogue, and you can invite people to reflect in a particular way after watching the film through designing some key questions that are pertinent and right for your context. Is this call for action a way to animate ourselves, our communities, to be the good news for the whole of creation? Yes, indeed it is. It's an open invitation and it's inclusive of everyone. So starting in this way will really help animate what Pope Francis calls the gospel of creation. The gospel of creation is in fact the second chapter in Laudato Si, where Pope Francis outlines all of those connections through sacred scripture from Genesis right through the Psalms and into the Gospels. But he also talks about the loving gaze of Jesus, and that we're invited to bring and embody that loving gaze with everyone we meet, wherever we are in creation. To notice the cries of creation, to listen deeply, to notice the cries of the poor and listen deeply, and bring about responses that integrates that. This is our work. So what is the Laudato Si action plan and how do we go about it? Well, Pope Francis, of course, is the leader of the Laudato Si action plan, and he is the one who has put forward 7 Laudato Si goals for us to respond to. His invitation of implementing an encyclical is the first of its kind in the history of the Church. It is a big step forward for that leadership, with all of us being invited to develop a way that responds to those 7 Laudato Si goals and puts the plans that we create each year into action. It is actually a 7-year journey that we're called to embark upon. As a school, as a parish, as an agency, as a hospital, as an aged care facility, as religious, as a business, as farmers, we're all called onto this journey. And the idea is that it comes from the grassroots. It needs to be right in your context of the community of life that's there, people and creation. And starting humbly, starting by saying that our actions will be these simple steps of bringing people together for the dialogue, of tuning into creation and discerning what our next steps might be that are doable in the first year so that we're preparing the grounds well. The Catholic Bishops of Australia, of course, in their 2021 social justice statement, publicly announced their commitment to creation. In that statement, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. At the second assembly of the Plenary Council this year, the 8th decree on integral ecology is for all of us to go on this journey. So we're working with Pope Francis, we're working with the Vatican Dicastery, with the Laudato Si action plan being led by them, and we're also working with the Australian Catholic Bishops' Call in response to move towards integral ecology. We know that not everybody is yet aware of this call and what it means. This includes our parish priests sometimes, this includes our leaders of agencies, this includes those that might be perceived to not be able to yet help us. What we need to do is hold the space, invite the dialogue, and to go on the journey and show what it does look like, what it does mean. So it's the humble beginnings from which these things happen that can actually fairly swiftly bring about quite amazing shifts. One example of this that I'm delighted to share with you is the work I've been doing with the parish at their invitation in Canberra. We began in what might be seen as the most difficult conditions. And here I'll remind us of the gift of the tiny mustard seed. I was invited to be part of cracking open Laudato Si online because we were in COVID, with some webinar events exploring what Pope Francis's teachings are. And through that dialogue, many things were able to emerge. The commitment was clear that the parish wanted to embark on this journey. And yes, they certainly had a leader who was willing to support this action without having to be integrally leading it himself, but to support it in a way that was making announcements, as only a parish priest can, part of homilies, part of the parish bulletin announcements. Those things were important, but they were not the essence of what was leading it. His delegation of authority to allow the parish to move forward with the webinar events and all of the many things that have since followed. And this parish community opened it up to other parishes to be part of the journey. And just last month, a conference was held that was open to all parishes in the Canberra-Goulburn Archdiocese at a school, which included then other dimensions of our Catholic Church community. And it was a wonderful event that showed the intention of that group to embark on the journey as a parish with a Laudato Si action plan being formed, but also supporting the whole Archdiocese to form a plan. So that's one example. And there are many examples of the actions of Laudato Si being brought to life. But I just wanted to highlight that at this conference event in my presentation before opening for questions. So let's perhaps now move to opening for some dialogue. I'm really happy to hear any questions that you might have that are emerging or that you've been thinking about, because what I've outlined are the beginning ways, but there's more work to be done when we're maintaining this journey and going forward beyond the beginning that you might want to ask about, or indeed any other aspect of this work, because it touches on everything. The global climate story with COP27 coming up, the national context of our work, the regional Oceania space of being on a synodal journey together with the assembly of the FCBCO that's coming up, and of course at our local, very real, concretised levels of church life. So I'm happy to take questions on any of these things and wherever you are. Thank you.